The sun begins its slow and inevitable descent over the high, mud brick walls of the caravanserai, casting long, bruised shadows that stretch across the courtyard like the fingers of a weary traveler reaching for a final rest. You stand at the center of this enclosed sanctuary, where the air is thick with the cooling scent of sun-baked earth and the faint, lingering ghost of incense from a merchant who departed at the first light of dawn. The sounds of the world outside the heavy timber gates have begun to recede, replaced by the intimate, localized acoustics of the courtyard, as the dust kicked up by the day's arrival begins to settle in a silent, invisible rain. Each grain of silt, a microscopic shard of quartz and ancient bone, finds its place in the crevices of the paving stones, filling the narrow gaps with a soft, buff-colored sediment that mutes the strike of your leather-soled sandals. You can feel the residual heat of the afternoon radiating from the walls, a dry and pulsing warmth that meets the first tendrils of the evening chill creeping down from the high mountain passes. The silence here is not empty. It is a layered tapestry of small, heavy sounds. The slow, rhythmic exhale of a pack animal in the corner, the distant clink of a ceramic bowl being set upon a wooden table, and the sigh of the wind as it catches on the jagged edges of the roofline. Your attention drifts to the surface of a nearby stone pillar, worn smooth by centuries of leaning shoulders and the abrasive caress of the desert wind. And you trace the faint, irregular texture of its surface with a thumb, noting the coolness that has already begun to claim its northern side. There's a profound weight to this moment, a sense of stillness that precedes the immense labor of the night, as if the very air has become thicker and more viscous, slowing your movements and drawing your focus down to the microscopic world at your feet. You observe a single, stray thread of hemp caught in a splinter of the gate, vibrating almost imperceptibly in the breeze, a tiny pendulum marking the passage of a time that has no need for clocks or calendars. The atmosphere is one of transition, a gentle shedding of the day's frantic energy in favor of a deliberate, meditative pace that acknowledges the gravity of the journey ahead. You feel the tactile anchor of the heavy wool shawl draped over your shoulders, its coarse fibers pressing against the back of your neck with a reassuring, scratchy warmth that grounds you in the present moment. The light turns a deep, honeyed amber, illuminating the fine coat of golden dust that covers every surface, turning the mundane tools of the trade into artifacts of light and shadow. You watch as a small lizard darting across the mud brick freezes, its tiny chest heaving in a rhythmic pulse that matches the heartbeat of the building itself. And you realize that even the stones seem to be breathing, expanding and contracting as they release the day's fire into the darkening sky. There's no hurry here, only the inevitable progression of the shadows and the steady, certain arrival of the blue hour, when the world loses its edges and blends into a singular velvet whole. The dust continues its descent, coating the iron rings set into the walls and the heavy wooden troughs, creating a soft, matte finish that hides the scars of use and the rust of age. You find yourself focusing on the sound of your own breath, a low and steady rhythm that harmonizes with the distant, muffled sounds of the stables, where the animals are settling into the straw with heavy, contented thuds. The grit beneath your feet shifts with a dry, whispering sound as you shift your weight, a reminder of the thousands of miles of road that have been ground down into this very floor. You reach out to touch the heavy iron latch of the inner door, and the metal is startlingly cold, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the air, sending a gentle shiver of awareness through your fingertips as you prepare to enter the stillness of the warehouse. Every movement is a choice, every breath a deliberate act of immersion in this sanctuary of stone and sand, where the history of the world is written in the slow accumulation of dust and the patient waiting of the night. You feel the weight of the air, heavy with the promise of spice and silk, pressing against your skin like a soft, invisible blanket. And you allow yourself to sink into the profound, unhurried peace of the settling courtyard. Within the dim, cool sanctuary of the counting room, the air remains remarkably still, holding the scent of old wood, dried earth, and the faint, acidic tang of fermented ink. You move toward the low, cedar-topped desk, where a single cylinder of sun-dried papyrus rests, its edges frayed into a fine, blonde fringe that catches the low flicker of the oil lamp. As you reach out, your fingertips first meet the cool, polished surface of the wood, a tactile anchor that grounds you before you engage with the fragile weight of the record. You begin the process of unrolling the scroll, a task that demands a slow, deliberate patience to ensure the ancient plant fibers do not crack under the strain of sudden movement. With a gentle, persistent pressure, the scroll yields, producing a sound like the world's softest autumn leaves being crushed underfoot, a dry and rhythmic crackle that fills the small room with the ghost of a harvest. You watch as the horizontal and vertical strips of the pith reveal themselves, a microscopic grid of biological history woven together by hands long gone, and you trace the slight ridges where the layers overlap with a steady, reverent thumb. The papyrus feels strangely skin-like, possessing a warmth that belies its brittle appearance, and as it flattens against the desk, you use a small, smooth river stone to weight the leading edge, feeling the heavy, rounded coldness of the mineral against your palm. Now comes the preparation of the reed pen, a slender stalk of phragmites cut from a distant riverbank and dried until it reached a state of perfect, hollow resonance. You hold the pen between your fingers, noting the lightness of its weight, almost as if it were a hollow bone, and you examine the nib, which has been sliced at a precise diagonal to allow for the steady, gravitational flow of pigment. The ink pot sits nearby, a heavy vessel of fired clay containing a thick, viscous liquid made from charred vine wood and gum arabic. You dip the tip of the reed into the darkness, watching the liquid climb the fibers through capillary action, a slow and silent saturation that turns the pale reed to a deep, obsidian black. When the nib finally touches the surface of the papyrus, there is a minute resistance, a microscopic snagging of the wood against the fibrous tooth of the paper that produces a faint, scratchy hiss with every deliberate stroke. You begin to record the inventory, focusing entirely on the formation of a single character, the way the ink pools slightly at the start of a line, and then thins into a translucent charcoal as the pen moves across the page. There is no haste in this calligraphy, Each stroke is a meditation on the mechanics of friction and fluid dynamics, a testament to the patient accumulation of data. You describe the way the reed vibrates in your hand, a tiny, high-frequency tremor that travels up your arm as the nib navigates the uneven terrain of the papyrus pith, hitting a small knot and skipping with a soft, hollow click. Between entries, you pause to breathe in the scent of the wet ink, which smells of ancient smoke and stagnant rain, and you feel the weight of your own body settling into the wooden stool, the grain of the seat pressing through the thin fabric of your tunic. The scratching of the pen becomes the heartbeat of the room, a repetitive and hypnotic rhythm that marks the transition of physical goods into abstract marks of history. You observe the way a single drop of ink dries, losing its glossy sheen and sinking into the thirsty fibers until it becomes a matte, permanent shadow. The papyrus seems to drink the liquid, the brown gold of the plant material darkening where the message takes hold, and you move the scroll further along, the thrum of the unrolling process acting as a soft, sonic bridge between the columns of text. Your eyes follow the microscopic fraying of the reed's tip, noting how it wears down against the abrasive surface of the scroll, requiring a momentary pause to shave the edge with a small, sharp knife. The sound of the blade peeling a hair-thin ribbon of reed is a crisp, clean zip that punctuates the silence, followed by the soft thud of the shaving hitting the stone floor. Every entry is a testament to the diligence of the common man, a quiet architecture of commerce built one scratch at a time. The scroll grows longer, a bridge of information stretching across the desk, and you find yourself lost in the minute details of the script, the way a curved line mimics the bend of a river. The room feels smaller now, more intimate, as if the walls themselves are leaning in to listen to the rhythmic dialogue between the reed and the parchment. You complete the final line for the evening's first watch, the ink still wet and glistening like a dark, watchful eye in the lamplight. And you wait, watching the moisture evaporate until the surface is once again flat and silent. Leaving the counting room behind, you step into the shadowed expanse of the storage bay, where the air is noticeably cooler and carries the sharp, clean perfume of freshly sawn cedar. Before you stand the heavy transport crates, stacked in silent, orderly ranks, each one a fortress of timber designed to protect precious cargo from the biting sands and mountain humidity of the Silk Road. You move toward the nearest chest, your hand reaching out to meet the rough-hewn surface of the wood, and as your fingers make contact, you feel the distinct, raised ridges of the grain, a topographical map of the tree's long life in a distant forest. The wood is cool to the touch, holding the chill of the stone floor, yet there is a subterranean warmth deep within the fibers that seems to respond to the pressure of your palm. You begin a methodical inspection of the joints, leaning in close to observe where the planks meet, looking for any microscopic gaps that might allow the desert's fine silt to infiltrate the interior. Your thumb traces the line of a wooden peg, a small, hand-carved cylinder that has been driven home with a mallet, and you feel the slight mushrooming of the wood at the head, a sign of a blow struck with exactly the right amount of force. The smell of the cedar is intoxicating, a dry and resinous aroma that fills your lungs and clears your mind, acting as a natural repellent against the insects that dwell in the dark corners of the caravanserai. You find a small, stubborn splinter protruding from one corner, and using a small sanding stone, you begin to rub it away with a slow, circular motion that produces a rhythmic, shushing sound, like the breath of the tide against a pebbled shore. The friction generates a localized heat, and you can smell the oils of the wood being released, a more intense version of the cedar scent that clings to your skin. Every few moments, you pause to tap the side of the crate with a knuckle, listening to the resonance of the wood. A sharp, tight clack tells you the structure is sound, while a duller thud might indicate a hidden crack or a pocket of moisture. You feel the tactile anchor of a heavy clay water jar resting nearby, its exterior beaded with cold condensation that numbs your fingertips for a brief, refreshing second as you move to the next crate. This is the slow work of the provider, a quiet communion with the materials of the earth, ensuring that the labor of the spice growers is not lost to the elements. You observe how the lantern light catches the sap that has crystallized in a knot, turning it into a tiny amber-colored jewel that glows with a prehistoric light. The mechanics of the check are repetitive and hypnotic, a dance of touch and sound that stretches into the deep night. You move your hand over the iron bindings that reinforce the corners, noting the pitted texture of the hand-forged metal and the way the blacksmith's hammer left a series of overlapping, scalloped marks across the surface. The metal is much colder than the wood, a biting, industrial chill that contrasts with the organic softness of the cedar. You find a slight looseness in one of the bands, and taking a small hammer from your belt, you tap it back into place with a series of muffled, metallic pulses that echo softly off the high, vaulted ceiling. There is no urgency in your movements, only the steady, rhythmic assurance of a task being performed with total focus. The crate is more than just a box. It is a vessel for the hopes of the caravan, a sturdy companion for the months of travel ahead. You lean your weight against the heavy lid, feeling the wood groan and settle under the pressure, a sound of structural integrity that satisfies a deep, instinctual need for security. As you finish your inspection of the final crate in the row, you stand back and breathe in the stillness of the warehouse, feeling the weight of the silence and the comforting presence of the timber all around you. The wood seems to absorb the sound of your breathing, creating a muffled, private world where only the textures and the scents remain. You are ready now to begin the packing, the transition from the container to the contained. In the center of the warehouse, you turn your attention to the massive rolls of burlap and hempen cloth that lean like sleeping giants against the stone walls. You reach for the edge of the uppermost bolt, your fingers sinking into the rough, hairy fibers of the jute, and you begin the long, rhythmic process of unspooling the material across the cool floor. The sound of the fabric unfurling is a deep, low-frequency huff, followed by the abrasive rasp of the weave sliding against itself, a sound that feels as much like a vibration in your chest as a noise in your ears. The burlap is heavy and stiff, infused with the scent of dried vegetable oil, and the dusty, earthy smell of the fields where it was harvested. As you pull the length toward you, you feel the distinct, square grid of the weave, each thick thread of twine crossing another in a pattern of perfect, utilitarian repetition. The texture is intensely tactile, a coarse and prickly surface that leaves a faint, tingly heat on your palms as you smooth out the ripples and folds. You use your weight to press the fabric flat, the grit of the floor beneath the cloth making a tiny, crunching protest that is quickly muffled by the density of the hemp. This fabric is the secondary skin of the caravan, the flexible armor that will wrap the spice crates to keep the sun's glare from drying the oils within the wood. You find the wooden measuring stick, a long rod of ash worn silver by years of use, and you lay it alongside the cloth, noting the cool, waxy feel of the polished wood against your skin. The task of cutting the bales to size is a slow and sensory-rich endeavor. You take up the heavy iron shears, their blades dark and smelling of whetstone oil, and you begin the first incision. The sound is a thick, satisfying snip crunch as the metal severs the stubborn fibers of the jute, a resistance you can feel traveling through the handles and into the bones of your hand. Every few inches, you must pause to clear the lint that accumulates on the hinge, the fine, blonde dust of the hemp floating momentarily in the lamplight before settling back into the weave. You feel the tactile anchor of the heavy, cold shears resting in your lap during these pauses, their weight providing a grounding pressure against your thighs. The air around you becomes filled with the microscopic particles of the fiber, a dry and organic cloud that makes the silence of the room feel even more textured and dense. You move to fold the cut sections, a process that requires you to lean into the material, using the strength of your shoulders to create a crisp, heavy crease in the stubborn fabric. The sound of the fold is a muffled, internal thud, and as you press the edge with the heel of your hand, you feel the heat generated by the friction of the fibers being forced into a new shape. You repeat this motion dozens of times, the repetition becoming a form of moving meditation, where the only thing that exists is the distance between the shears and the edge of the bolt. The burlap is cool where it has touched the stone, but where your hands have worked it, the material becomes warm and supple, yielding to your will with a slow, fibrous groan. You observe the way the lamplight casts deep, cross-hatched shadows through the open weave of the cloth, creating a secondary map on the floor beneath it. The work is physically demanding, but mentally quiet, a series of predictable, tactile events that bridge the gap between the raw materials and the finished load. You run your fingers over a finished stack of squares, feeling the incredible density of the piled hemp, a soft but unyielding tower of protection. The roughness of the material has left your skin slightly sensitized, a pleasant, buzzing warmth that makes you acutely aware of every breath of air moving through the storage bay. You are preparing the cradle for the spices, a soft but rugged bed of ancient fiber that has carried the world's treasures for centuries. Beside the stack of prepared burlap lies a massive coil of raw jute cordage, a golden brown serpent of twisted fiber that smells of sun-dried grass and deep, subterranean earth. You reach down to lift the leading end, and the rope feels surprisingly heavy and bristled, its surface a chaotic landscape of tiny, protruding fibers that tickle and prick the sensitive skin of your palms. You begin the slow, rhythmic process of measuring out the lengths needed for the primary lashings, pulling the cord over your shoulder in a steady, hand-over-hand motion that creates a dry, sliding SHHH sound against the fabric of your tunic. Each pull requires a deliberate exertion of the back muscles, a slow build of tension that you can feel radiating from your core to your fingertips as the coil resists the air. You examine the structure of the rope, noting how 3 smaller strands are spiraled together in a perfect mathematical helix, each one biting into the other to create a unified strength that can withstand the swaying weight of a 1,000-pound load. As you work, you find a section where the twist has loosened, and you take a moment to sit upon the cool stone floor, the chill of the masonry seeping through your clothing as a grounding tactile anchor. You begin to manually retwist the fibers, using the heat of your hands to coax the jute back into its tight, coiled geometry, feeling the individual strands groan and creak as they are forced back into alignment. The sound is high-pitched and organic, a microscopic protest of fiber against fiber that resonates through your knuckles. To prevent the ends from fraying, you practice the how-to of a simple whip stitch, using a thinner, waxed twine that smells of honey and old hives. The wax provides a smooth, tacky resistance as you pull the twine tight, the zip of the coated string cutting through the silence of the warehouse like a soft intake of breath. You watch as the twine sinks into the rough surface of the jute, disappearing into the furrows of the rope and binding the loose ends into a solid, unyielding cylinder. Every few minutes, you pause to test the tension, wrapping a length of the cord around a wooden post and leaning back with your full weight. The rope responds with a deep, vibratory hum, a low-frequency song of structural integrity that you can feel in your very teeth. The air in the storage bay remains cool, but the repetitive motion of pulling and twisting has brought a faint glow of warmth to your skin, and you appreciate the scratchy, honest friction of the jute as it polishes the calluses on your hands. You move to create a series of loops and coils, laying them out on the burlap like offerings, the circular shapes of the rope creating a soft, repetitive visual rhythm against the square grid of the cloth. You observe how the lantern light catches the individual hairs of the jute, creating a halo of golden light around the cord that makes it appear almost soft, despite its rugged utility. There's a profound satisfaction in the physics of the knot, the way a simple overlap of material can transform a flexible string into a rigid lock. You practice the common man's hitch, a knot passed down through generations of traders, focusing on the way the rope must be tucked under itself with a firm, thumb-pressed tuck. The sound of the rope tightening is a series of small, staccato pops as the air is squeezed out from between the fibers, leaving behind a hard, knotty lump that feels like a smooth stone. You run your hand over the finished coils, feeling the incredible potential energy stored within the tension of the fibers, a silent promise of security for the journey through the high passes. The work is slow, your fingers moving with a mechanical certainty that requires no thought, allowing your mind to drift into the deep, quiet rhythm of the warehouse. Deep within the innermost chamber of the warehouse, away from the coarse textures of hemp and wood, you approach the cedar chests reserved for the finest of linings. You reach into a protected bundle and withdraw a length of raw, undyed silk, a material so light it seems to float upon the stagnant air like a captured cloud. As the fabric falls over your arms, the sensation is one of startling liquid cool, a tactile anchor that feels almost like water against your skin, providing a stark contrast to the rugged materials you have handled throughout the night. You begin the how-to of layering the silk, which requires a delicate, open-palmed technique to prevent the fine threads from snagging on the microscopic imperfections of your hands. The sound of silk moving against silk is almost non-existent, a ghostly, high-frequency SHHH that is more a felt vibration than a true noise, a soundless glide that mimics the movement of a breeze through high mountain grass. You lay the first sheet into the bottom of an empty spice crate, and you watch as the fabric settles with a slow, sighing deceleration, conforming perfectly to the corners and crevices of the cedar. The silk acts as a molecular barrier, a soft shield that will prevent the volatile oils of the saffron and cardamom from being absorbed by the thirsty wood. You use a smooth, rounded glass muller to press the silk into the joints, the clink of the glass against the wood punctuating the silence of the room like a single drop of rain. Every movement must be performed with a steady, rhythmic grace. If you move too quickly, the silk billows upward, fighting the gravity of the room with its own weightless energy. You observe the way the lamplight interacts with the fibers, the silk possessing a natural, pearlescent sheen that scatters the light in a soft, diffused glow, making the interior of the crate look as though it were lined with moonlight. As you smooth the layers, you feel the incredible strength hidden within the delicacy. The silk is nearly impossible to tear, a testament to the thousands of miles of thread spun by the humble silkworm. You spend a long duration ensuring there are no ripples, your fingers moving in wide, sweeping arcs that generate a faint, static warmth you can feel in the hair of your forearms. The smell of the silk is neutral, almost sterile, a clean scent that will not interfere with the complex bouquets of the spices soon to be nestled within. You feel the coolness of a small porcelain bowl of rosewater nearby, and you dip your fingers in to keep them supple, the floral scent blending momentarily with the cedar of the room. This process of lining is a quiet, reverent task, the final preparation of the sanctum before the alchemy of the spice begins. You check each corner one last time, your touch light as a feather, ensuring the silk is taut and perfect. The crate is now transformed, its rough interior hidden behind a shimmering, silver-white skin that waits in patient silence. You stand back, your breathing slow and synchronized with the flickering of the lamp, feeling the profound stillness of the finished work. The time has come for the primary containers to meet their charge, and you approach the heavy earthenware jars filled to the brim with black peppercorns, the black gold of the southern coasts. As you lift the lid of the first jar, a sharp, pungent warmth blooms in the air, a spicy and woody aroma that tingles in the back of your throat and awakens your senses to the sheer potency of the cargo. You take up a wide, shallow scoop carved from dark horn, and as you plunge it into the depths of the jar, the sound is a dry, rolling crunch shimmer the berries shifting and sliding against one another like a million tiny river stones. You lift the scoop, feeling the surprising density and shifting weight of the peppercorns, each one a wrinkled, sun-dried orb that holds a universe of heat within its blackened skin. How-to of the pour is a delicate art of acoustics and height. You hold the scoop several inches above the silk-lined crate and tilt it slowly, allowing a single, steady stream of berries to descend. The sound of the first peppercorns hitting the silk is a soft, muffled thud patter. But as the layer builds, the noise transforms into a rhythmic, rain-like shhh-tick, a hypnotic and white noise melody that fills the warehouse. You watch as the berries find their level, pouring them in a circular motion to ensure the weight is distributed evenly across the fragile silk floor. Every berry is a tiny, imperfect sphere, and you reach down to run your hand through the rising pile, feeling the cool, bobby texture of the peppercorns as they flow between your fingers like a dry, aromatic liquid. This is your tactile anchor, the sensation of thousands of small, hard points of pressure against your palm, a gritty and rolling massage that connects you to the earth of a distant, tropical shore. You notice the way the light catches the oily sheen on the berries, a deep charcoal luster that speaks of their freshness and strength. The pour is a slow and deliberate act. You do not rush the flow, but rather listen to the pitch of the rain, adjusting the angle of your wrist to maintain a constant, soothing frequency. As the crate fills, the sound deepens, moving from a high-pitched rattle to a low, resonant thrum that vibrates through the wooden floor and into the soles of your feet. You pause to use a flat wooden paddle to level the surface, the scrape hiss of the wood against the berries, adding a new layer to the sensory tapestry of the room. The dust of the pepper rises in a fine, invisible mist, and you feel a slight warmth on your skin where the spice hole settles, a faint and pleasant burn that reminds you of the value of your labor. You spend a long duration ensuring the crate is filled exactly to the shoulder, leaving just enough room for the final seals. The sheer volume of the pepper creates its own microclimate of scent, a heavy and comforting cloud that seems to insulate you from the rest of the world. You look down at the dark, undulating surface of the spice, a sea of black berries that represents the sweat of 1,000 laborers and the hope of 1,000 more. The rhythm of the scoop, the pour, and the level becomes your entire world, a repetitive cycle of weight and sound that carries you deeper into the meditative stillness of the night. From the deep, dark sea of the peppercorns, you turn toward the long, narrow bundles of cinnamon quills, which lie wrapped in protective palm leaves like precious manuscripts. As you peel back the dry, rustling foliage, the air is suddenly flooded with a sweet, woody heat, a scent so thick and nostalgic it seems to coat the back of your tongue with a dusty, sugary warmth. You reach out to lift a single quill of the inner bark, and the sensation is one of extreme, skeletal lightness. The cinnamon feels as brittle as an autumn leaf, yet it possesses a rigid, scrolled geometry that is a marvel of natural engineering. You hold the quill close to the lantern, observing the fine, papery layers of the bark, which are curled inward like the fingers of a resting hand, and you trace the vertical striations with a fingertip, feeling the dry, cork-like texture and the microscopic grit of the spice's essential oils. The how-to of packing these fragile lengths requires a rhythmic, nesting technique to maximize space, while preventing the bark from shattering under the weight of the journey. You begin to lay the first quills into the silk-lined crate, placing them side by side with a soft, hollow tink, a sound like the clatter of dry bones or the clicking of wooden beads. When a quill is too long for the container, you must shorten it by hand. You find the exact point of tension and apply a sharp, downward pressure with your thumb, resulting in a crisp, clean snap that echoes through the silent warehouse. The fracture reveals a fresh, lighter-colored interior, and a puff of aromatic dust rises to meet your face, a tactile anchor of dry heat that settles in your nostrils and on your lips. You spend a long duration carefully interlocking the scrolls, sliding the thinner quills into the hollow centers of the larger ones, a repetitive and delicate puzzle that demands your total focus. The sound of this nesting is a series of sliding, woody zips as the bark surfaces rub against one another, a texture that feels remarkably like old parchment or the scales of a desert lizard. You feel the weight of a heavy brass ring on your finger, its cold, smooth metal pressing against the warm, rough bark as you guide each piece into place. Every few layers, you pause to press down gently with your open palm, feeling the collective crush of the bundles as they settle and lock together, a sound of 1,000 tiny fractures that creates a more stable, solid mass. The scent intensifies with every broken quill, becoming almost heavy enough to taste, a sweet and peppery cloud that hangs in the stagnant air of the bay. You observe the variation in the colors of the bark, from the deep, reddish-brown of the older trees to the pale, sandy tan of the younger growth, and you organize them into a gradient of earth tones. Your movements are slow and circular, your hands moving in a hypnotic loop from the bundle to the crate, the snap of the bark providing a staccato rhythm to the low-frequency hum of the desert wind outside. This is the common man's alchemy, the turning of tree bark into gold through the simple application of time and care. As the crate nears the top, you tuck the final, smallest shards into the remaining gaps, ensuring there is no movement when the box is shifted. The crate is now a solid block of fragrance, a dense architecture of spice that feels remarkably sturdy despite the individual fragility of its parts. You stand back, your hands covered in a fine, cinnamon-colored powder that feels like silk and smells like the sun, and you listen to the settling silence of the bark. In the center of the workspace, a small charcoal brazier glows with a low, pulsing orange light, providing a localized pool of heat that contrasts with the creeping midnight chill of the stone floor. You place a heavy iron pot upon the grate, and within it lie several solid blocks of unrefined beeswax, their surfaces dull and opaque, smelling faintly of summer clover and the industrious hum of 1,000 hives. As the heat penetrates the metal, you witness the slow, metamorphic transition of the wax from solid to liquid, a process that begins with a gentle softening of the edges until the blocks lose their shape and subside into a thick, golden pool. The sound of the melting wax is nearly non-existent, save for a rare minute pop as a tiny air bubble escapes the viscous mass, a sound so subtle it requires the absolute silence of the deep night to be heard. You take a long, slender stirring stick made of green willow and move it in slow, concentric circles through the liquid, feeling the heavy, syrupy resistance of the wax as it thickens and thins with the temperature of the coals. The scent is transformative, a heavy, honeyed musk that anchors you to the physical reality of the work, filling your lungs with a sweet, floral density that seems to coat the very walls of the storage bay. Your tactile anchor in this moment is the heat of the iron handle, muffled by a thick pad of folded leather that you grip firmly, the warmth seeping through the layers to reach your palm with a steady, reassuring pulse. Once the wax has reached the consistency of molten honey, you lift the pot and move toward the primary spice crates, which are now packed and waiting for their final seal. The how-to of sealing requires a steady hand and a rhythmic pouring motion to ensure the liquid enters every microscopic crevice of the wood joints. You tilt the pot, and a thin, translucent ribbon of gold descends, hitting the cedar with a soft, liquid hiss that quickly fades as the wax cools and solidifies. You watch as the liquid travels along the seams, a golden river navigating the topography of the grain, filling the gaps and creating an airtight barrier that will lock the scent of the cinnamon and pepper within its wooden prison. As the wax meets the cool air, it turns from a clear, shimmering fluid back into a matte, pale yellow solid, a transition that happens in a heartbeat, leaving behind a smooth, waxy trail that feels like polished stone under your fingertips. You use a small, flat-bladed knife to scrape away the excess, the sound of the metal against the wood, a clean, rhythmic zip scrape that punctuates the silence of the room. This process is repeated for every edge and every corner, a slow and methodical fortification of the cargo against the humid air of the coast and the dry dust of the plains. You observe the way the lamplight reflects off the newly sealed seams, creating a series of amber highlights that define the geometry of the crates. The work is quiet and deeply satisfying, a final act of closure that marks the end of the packing and the beginning of the journey's physical reality. You feel the weight of the night pressing in, but the warmth of the brazier and the honeyed air keep you grounded in the present, a common man performing an ancient rite of protection. The wax is now hard, a permanent seal that will not be broken until the crates reach a table thousands of miles away, and you run your hand one last time over the smooth, protected seams, feeling the absolute stillness of the completed work. With the crates sealed and the primary barriers in place, you move to the final stage of the interior assembly, where the soft materials must be wedded to the hard structures through the slow application of physical force. You stand over the open mouth of a large bale, where the layers of burlap and silk are still loose and filled with the invisible weight of trapped air. You begin the how-to of manual compression, a process that requires you to use the full weight of your torso, leaning into the material with your palms flat and fingers splayed. As you press down, you hear the collective, structural protest of the fibers, a deep, muffled crunch sigh, as the air is squeezed out from between the threads of the hemp. The sensation is one of profound resistance, followed by a sudden, yielding softness, a tactile anchor that makes you feel the true density of the cargo beneath your hands. You move your weight in a slow, clockwise circle, kneading the bale like a giant loaf of bread, ensuring that every corner is packed with the same unyielding firmness. The sound of this compression is rhythmic and heavy, a series of dull, internal thumps that resonate through the wooden floor and up into your knees. You can feel the heat of the friction building between the layers of cloth, a localized warmth that rises to meet your skin and blends with the cooling air of the storage bay. Your focus narrows to the microscopic level of the weave, observing how the individual threads of the burlap are forced closer together, losing their daylight gaps and becoming a singular, impenetrable wall of fiber. This is the work of the common man that no machine could replicate. It is a task of feeling for the give in the load and eliminating it until the bale feels as solid as a block of quarried stone. Every few minutes, you pause to catch your breath, resting your forehead against the cool, rough surface of the burlap, a moment of stillness where the only sound is the frantic, fading hiss of the last air pockets escaping. You notice how your handprints remain briefly in the fabric, a temporary ghost of your effort before the fibers slowly begin to expand back. You take up a heavy wooden tamping block, a tool worn smooth by generations of use, and begin to strike the top of the bale with measured, low-velocity blows. The sound changes from a hollow thwack to a solid, resonant clunk as the material reaches its maximum density. This repetition is hypnotic, a steady pulse that marks the deep midnight hour as you move from one bale to the next, repeating the cycle of press, knead, and strike. You feel the physical weight of the task in your shoulders and lower back, a tired but honest ache that grounds you in the reality of the trade. The air in the bay has grown thinner and colder, but the internal heat of the bales, generated by your own labor and the insulation of the spices, provides a comforting microclimate around your workspace. You observe the way the lamplight grazes the flattened surface of the hemp, showing the now compressed ridges and valleys of the weave. By the time you reach the final bale, the room feels smaller, the cargo now taking up less space, but possessing a far greater presence of weight and permanence. You run your hand over the finished, compressed surface, feeling the absolute lack of give, a sign that the spice will not shift or bruise during the long, rhythmic swaying of the camel's gait. The time has come to marry the heavy bales to their structural tethers, and you reach for the long coils of jute cordage that have been waiting in the shadows of the stone floor. You begin the how-to of the primary lashing, a task that requires a rhythmic coordination of the entire body as you throw the heavy rope over the bulk of the bale, hearing the thwack of the jute hitting the burlap with a solid, muffled finality. The sound of the rope being pulled through the iron rings set into the warehouse floor is a sharp, repetitive zip hiss, a high-frequency friction that echoes off the vaulted ceiling and resonates in the palms of your hands. As you prepare the sailor's hitch, you focus on the mechanical intersection of the fibers. You wrap the cord around itself in a series of tight, overlapping turns, feeling the heat generated by the rope as it slides through your grip. Your tactile anchor in this moment is the intense, abrasive bite of the jute against your calloused fingers, a sensation of rugged strength that ensures the knot will hold against the relentless swaying of a 1,000-mile trek. You lean back with your full weight, using your heels against the base of the crate for leverage, and you listen to the creak groan of the hempen fibers as they are strained to their absolute limit. The rope does not merely sit upon the bale. It sinks into the soft, compressed burlap, creating deep, protective furrows that lock the entire assembly into a singular, unyielding mass. You move with a slow, deliberate cadence, your hands dancing through the loops and tucks of the knotwork with a memory that lives in the muscles rather than the mind. Every pull is followed by a set, a moment where you hold the tension and feel the vibration of the rope, a low, humming frequency that tells you the knot is true. You observe the way the lamplight catches the individual stray hairs of the cordage, making the lashings look like golden webs woven by a giant, industrious spider. The air in the bay is now biting and cold, but the exertion of the lashing keeps a steady warmth in your chest, and you can smell the dry, grassy scent of the rope as it is worked. You practice the double turn at the corners, a specific technique of the common merchant that prevents the rope from sawing through the fabric over time, and you feel the snap of the cord as it seats itself into the wooden groove. The silence of the warehouse is punctuated only by these rhythmic, mechanical sounds: the zip of the sliding rope, the thud of your feet shifting on the stone, and the deep, resonant sigh of the bale as it is squeezed by the lashing. You spend a long duration ensuring each knot is identical to the last, a visual and tactile symmetry that reflects the discipline of the caravan. As you finish the final hitch, you tuck the remaining tail of the rope under the main line with a firm, thumb-pressed pop, a sound of completion that signals the bale is now a finished object of trade. You run your hand over the network of ropes, feeling the incredible tension and the hard, stony texture of the knots, which feel like permanent fixtures of the earth itself. The bale is now armored in cordage, a physical manifestation of security and care, ready to face the winds of the high desert. In the deep stillness of the warehouse, the heavy physical labor gives way to the silent, delicate finality of the scribe's hand. You approach a small, shallow stone bowl containing a pool of soot ink, a liquid so dark and matte that it seems to absorb the very light of the oil lamp. The ink has a specific, earthy scent, a mixture of burnt pine wood and the metallic tang of the iron vessel, and you use a small wooden stick to stir it, listening to the soft, viscous lap-lap of the fluid against the stone. You take up a brush made of stiff hog bristle, the handle a smooth, cool length of bamboo that feels weightless between your fingers, providing a gentle tactile anchor after the rough friction of the ropes. The how-to of marking the goods requires a steady, rhythmic breathing to ensure the characters are legible against the coarse, undulating texture of the burlap. You dip the brush into the ink, watching the bristles saturate and swell, and then you press the tip against the edge of the bowl to remove the excess, a motion that is silent and repetitive. When the brush first meets the burlap, you feel the microscopic resistance of the fibers, the stiff bristles skipping slightly over the peaks and valleys of the heavy hempen weave. The sound is a faint, dry scritch, a rhythmic whispering that marks the passage of the brush as you paint the large, bold characters that denote the destination and the contents. You do not rush. Each stroke is a deliberate meditation, the ink sinking into the thirsty jute and spreading slightly, creating a soft, blurred edge that looks like ancient lichen on a rock. You focus on the mechanical pressure of your hand, knowing that too much weight will cause the ink to blot, while too little will leave the mark faint and ghost-like. As the ink dries, it loses its liquid sheen and becomes a permanent, carbon black shadow of the journey to come. You move from bale to bale, the tip-tap scritch of your tools creating a low-frequency cadence that harmonizes with the distant, rhythmic breathing of the resting camels. The air around you is cold and stagnant, but the focus of the calligraphy keeps your mind sharp and your internal world quiet. You observe the way the lamplight grazes the wet ink, making the characters briefly appear as if they were made of black glass before they settle into the matte fabric. This is the common man's final signature, the act of naming and claiming the cargo before it disappears into the vastness of the Silk Road. You spend a long duration on the merchant's mark, a complex geometry of lines and dots that you have painted thousands of times, your hand moving with a fluid, autonomous grace. The texture of the burlap beneath the brush is a reminder of all the layers you have built throughout the night: the silk, the spice, the wood, and the rope, now all summarized in a single, dark mark. You feel the weight of the night ending, a profound sense of closure as the last character is completed, and the brush is laid to rest across the stone bowl with a soft, hollow tink. The ink is now part of the bale, a silent guide that will speak for the cargo in markets you may never see. You stand back, your eyes tracing the black calligraphy against the golden brown hemp, and you listen to the absolute silence of the marked and ready world. The physical labor has concluded, and you find yourself seated upon a low stone bench, the deep, penetrating cold of the masonry serving as a steady tactile anchor against your tired muscles. In the center of the small wooden table before you sits the oil lamp, a simple vessel of unglazed red clay that has grown warm to the touch through the hours of the night. You lean in close, your world narrowing to the small, flickering circumference of the flame, and you observe the microscopic mechanics of the light. The oil within the reservoir, a thick, golden pressing of sesame seeds, moves with a slow and viscous grace, shifting like liquid honey as you subtly adjust your weight on the bench. You watch as the liquid climbs the braided cotton wick through the silent pull of capillary action, a hidden journey of fuel rising to meet the fire. The scent is heavy and comforting, a mixture of toasted nuttiness and the faint, charred smell of the burning wick, which provides a localized atmosphere of domestic safety within the vast, drafty warehouse. Every few minutes, the silence is punctuated by a minute, crystalline pop, as a microscopic bead of moisture within the oil meets the heat. A sound so delicate it feels like the snapping of a tiny twig in a distant forest. The flame itself is a living thing, a teardrop of blue and amber that dances in the imperceptible drafts, its movement casting long, rhythmic shadows of the spice bales against the far walls, making the heavy cargo appear to breathe in the gloom. You take a small bronze needle and gently nudge the charred tip of the wick to keep the light steady. The tink of the metal against the clay vessel, a sharp, clear note that vibrates through your fingers. The heat radiating from the lamp is a gentle, pulsing presence on your face, a contrast to the icy air that clings to the corners of the room. You observe the way the light catches the fine silt on the table's surface, illuminating individual grains of sand that have traveled hundreds of miles just to rest here in the glow. There's no hurry now. The night has reached its deepest point, that hollow hour where time seems to stretch and thin like pulled sugar. You feel the weight of your own eyelids, heavy and rhythmic in their blinking, and you listen to the low, resonant thrum of the warehouse as it settles into the cold. The oil lamp is your sole companion, a miniature sun that defines the boundaries of your immediate reality, its fuel slowly receding as the night consumes itself. You spend a long duration simply watching the interface between the wick and the oil, noting how the flame consumes the liquid without a sound, a perfect and silent alchemy of energy. The orange light reflects in the dark pool of the reservoir, a mirror of the fire that looks like a trapped star in a sea of gold. This is the quietest chore of the common man, the tending of the light, a task of patience and observation that requires nothing but presence. As the lamp burns lower, the scent of the sesame oil deepens, becoming richer and more earthy, and you feel a profound sense of peace in the small, flickering certainty of the flame. Outside the thick, insulating walls of the caravanserai, the desert has begun its nightly dialogue, a low and mournful song of air moving across the vast, undulating geometry of the dunes. You sit in the stillness of the warehouse and listen as the wind finds the microscopic imperfections in the mud brick architecture, producing a series of thin, melodic whistles as it rushes through the ventilation slits high above. The sound is not a roar, but a dry and rhythmic hushing, a constant shhhvvv that mimics the sound of a distant ocean tide receding over infinite shingle. Within the room, this movement of air manifests as a ghost of a draft, a faint and chilling touch that carries the scent of ancient, sun-bleached minerals and the cold metallic tang of the high plateaus. You watch as the draft interacts with the fine airborne silt that has been suspended in the warehouse all night. The dust begins to descend in slow, spiraling plumes, caught in the orange light of your lamp like a fall of microscopic gold leaf. The how-to of the desert's arrival is a study in the accumulation of the minute, as you observe a single, hair-thin line of dust beginning to form along the top edge of a spice bale, a silent record of the wind's journey. Your tactile anchor is the sensation of this grit on your own skin, a dry, sandpaper-like texture that you feel when you rub your thumb and forefinger together, a reminder that the desert eventually claims everything it touches. The sound of the wind changes as it hits the jagged corners of the roofline, shifting from a hiss to a deep, resonant thrum that vibrates through the very foundations of the building, a low-frequency pulse that you feel in the marrow of your bones. You lean your head back against the stone wall, feeling the immense, unyielding mass of the mud brick as it absorbs the pressure of the gale, a silent protector that has stood against the sand for generations. The air in the room remains remarkably still despite the chaos outside. But you can see the way the flame of your oil lamp bows and shivers in sympathy with the external pressure. You spend a long duration tracking the movement of a single grain of sand as it dances across the smooth cedar of a crate, propelled by a microscopic current of air, until it finds a crevice and settles into a permanent rest. The desert wind is the architect of the road, a force that both hides and reveals the path, and its voice is the constant background music to the life of the caravan. You listen to the way the heavy timber gates groan in their iron sockets, a slow and rhythmic creak snap that sounds like the stretching of a great wooden limb. The scent of the wind is devoid of life. It is the smell of stone, of salt, and of the cold, empty spaces between the stars, and it cleanses the warehouse of the heavy, honeyed smell of the beeswax and the sharp heat of the pepper. You feel a profound sense of isolation and belonging, a small, warm spark of humanity tucked inside a fortress of clay, while the infinite, cold breath of the world sweeps past. The settling of the silt is a silent snowfall, a gray-gold shroud that mutes the colors of the burlap and the silk, turning the cargo into a series of soft, indistinct shapes. As the wind reaches a crescendo, the hushing sound becomes a steady, white noise drone that lulls your senses and slows your heart rate, a hypnotic frequency that signals the deepest part of the watch. You are a witness to the patience of the earth, watching the slow, inevitable dusting of the world, one grain of quartz at a time. In the velvet shadows of the stables, where the air is thick with the scent of fermented hay and the warm, musk-heavy humidity of resting beasts, you lean against a cedar pillar and listen to the ancient, subterranean rhythm of the ruminating camels. The darkness here is textured and alive, filled with the low-frequency hum-huff of deep, bellows-like breathing that vibrates through the very timber of the stalls and into the marrow of your bones. Your world narrows to the mechanical, circular motion of a single lead camel's jaw, a rhythmic and methodical grinding of teeth against tough desert forage that produces a dry, sliding, crumpsh sound, like two heavy millstones turning slowly against one another. You observe the way the sound travels through the animal's massive frame, a vibratory hum that you can feel as a steady pulse against the stone wall behind you, providing a deep tactile anchor that grounds you in the living weight of the caravan. Every few moments, the rhythm is broken by a wet, gravelly swallow, a sound of liquid weight descending through a long, muscular throat, followed by a sudden, profound silence that lasts only until the next rhythmic huff of breath warms the cool air of the stable. The scent is a complex layering of dry dust, sun-bleached fur, and the sharp, green tang of undigested herbs, a primordial aroma that seems to slow the passage of time. You reach out to touch the edge of a nearby wool blanket draped over a partition, feeling the coarse, oily lanolin of the fibers, and the way the fabric has absorbed the heat of the room, offering a soft but rugged resistance to your fingertips. The camels are great, stationary islands of warmth in the cooling night, their occasional shifting movements producing a muffled thud of padded hooves against the straw-covered earth, a sound that feels as if the building itself were sighing. You focus on the microscopic details of the silence between the grinds, the faint, metallic clink of a tether ring settling against a post, and the microscopic snip of a single straw being severed by a blunt tooth. This is the how-to of rest, a slow-motion recovery where every breath is a deliberate expansion of the ribs, stretching the heavy leather of the harness that remains loosely draped across their backs. You feel the coolness of a nearby clay water trough, its damp exterior providing a sharp, refreshing contrast to the humid warmth of the stable air, a sensation that sharpens your awareness of the heavy, somnolent atmosphere. The darkness seems to amplify the internal acoustics of the animals, turning the stable into a vast, resonating chamber of biological sound, a steady and predictable cadence that lulls the mind into a state of total stillness. You watch the rhythmic rise and fall of a shaggy flank in the dim light, a slow and tidal movement that mimics the shifting of the dunes, a reminder that even in sleep, the caravan is preparing for the miles ahead. The air is stagnant and heavy, a blanket of sound and scent that isolates you from the world beyond the walls, leaving only the slow, mechanical grinding and the deep, resonant heartbeat of the herd. The first pale wash of pre-dawn light, a cool and sterile gray, begins to seep into the stables through the high, arched ventilation slits, slowly illuminating the massive, sleeping forms of the camels. The rhythmic, low-frequency hum of their rumination has lessened, replaced by a more alert, shallow breathing that carries the scent of awakening, along with the sharp tang of clean, cold air. You move toward a stack of wooden pack saddles, their leather straps and carved frames smelling of aged hide and the faint, sweet memory of lanolin. You reach for the uppermost saddle, feeling the surprising lightness of the hollowed-out timber, yet sensing the inherent strength in its interlocking joints. Your tactile anchor is the smooth, polished surface of the main crossbeam, worn to a dark sheen by generations of friction against heavy loads. This is the how-to of the lift and the balance, a crucial choreography of weight distribution that determines the comfort and endurance of the animal for the 1,000-mile journey ahead. You begin by carefully positioning the saddle over the humped back of a kneeling camel, listening for the soft, dry thud as the wooden frame settles onto the thick, protective blanket. The animal responds with a low, rumbling groan, a deep, vibratory sound that you feel radiating up through your hands as you adjust the fit. You run your palms along the carved side panels, ensuring that the contours of the wood align with the natural curve of the beast's spine, feeling for any microscopic points of friction that might later cause chafing. The sound of your hands smoothing the wool blanket beneath the saddle is a soft, rhythmic shhh, a barely audible whisper that is quickly absorbed by the thick fabric. Next, you begin to attach the ropes and secondary straps, each one a practiced movement that has been honed over decades of caravan life. The clink of iron buckles against the wooden frame is a sharp, metallic note that echoes briefly in the quiet stable, a sound of industry and preparation. You hoist the first spice bale, a heavy, dense cube of burlap and rope, and slowly guide it onto one side of the pack saddle, feeling the immense, dead weight of the cargo as it resists your efforts. The moment the bale settles, there is a deep internal thump that you feel more than hear, a settling of the entire structure as it accepts its burden. The core of this task is the concept of symmetry, the balance of opposing forces, the precise art of counterweighting. You must find an identical bale, or combine smaller ones, to place on the opposite side, ensuring that the camel's spine remains perfectly aligned and unstressed. As the second bale is lifted and lowered into place, the entire saddle system responds with a soft, creaking groan of timber and leather, a sound of tension being distributed evenly across the frame. You spend a long duration adjusting the height and angle of each bale, pressing down on the rope lashings with the heel of your hand, feeling the solid, unyielding resistance of the compressed spices beneath the burlap. The air in the stable is now a complex blend of camel musk, dry hay, and the sharp, clean scent of cedar and cinnamon wafting from the newly loaded crates, a powerful olfactory tapestry of the road. You step back, your eyes scanning the silhouette of the laden camel, looking for any tilt or imbalance, your movements slow and deliberate in the growing light. This meticulous attention to balance is a silent conversation between man and beast, a testament to shared survival on the long, unforgiving miles. The work is physically demanding, your muscles straining with each lift, but the mental focus required to achieve perfect equilibrium is equally taxing, turning the stable into a silent workshop of applied physics and ancient wisdom. With the weight of the spice bales now perfectly balanced across the wooden frame, you reach beneath the barrel of the animal to find the long, wide cinch strap made of heavy, all-tanned ox hide. The leather is thick and cool to the touch, possessing a substantial, comforting weight that speaks of its immense tensile strength. And as you pull it through the dust, it makes a soft, sliding SHSHSH sound against the straw. You guide the end of the strap through the heavy iron buckle, and your tactile anchor is the sensation of the cold, pitted metal against your calloused palm, a sharp contrast to the living, rhythmic warmth of the camel's flank. The how-to of the cinch is a slow and incremental application of force. You do not jerk the strap, but rather lean your weight back into a steady, rhythmic pull that causes the leather to speak in a deep, internal creak groan. This sound is the voice of the hide being stretched to its limit, a series of minute, staccato pops as the fibers of the leather and the weave of the girth strap lock together under the pressure. You watch as the strap sinks into the thick, protective wool of the saddle blanket, the pressure causing the camel to let out a long, hollow exhale, a vibrating huff of air that carries the scent of dry grain and ancient dust. You pause for a moment, keeping the tension held firm, and you feel the rhythmic pulse of the animal's heart through the strap, a steady and powerful thrum that reminds you of the life force supporting the cargo. The sound of the iron tongue of the buckle sliding across the leather is a dry, metallic screech-click as it finds the appropriate hole, a note of finality that resonates through the wooden saddle frame. You repeat the process with the secondary belly strap and the breast piece, each movement requiring a deliberate, muscular exertion that brings a faint glow of heat to your shoulders and chest. The air in the stable is now bright with the blue light of morning, and the scent of the oiled leather begins to bloom in the cold, a rich and waxy aroma that mingles with the sharp, resinous perfume of the cedar crates. You use the flat of your hand to check the tension, sliding your fingers between the cinch and the animal's skin. The strap should be as tight as a bowstring, yet yielding enough to allow for the deep, rhythmic expansion of the lungs during the trek. You feel the grit of the desert silt that has already found its way into the buckle's hinge, a microscopic grinding that you can feel more than hear as you make the final adjustment. Every cinch tightened is a promise made to the animal, a structural guarantee that the load will not shift or gall during the long hours of swaying motion. You spend a long duration ensuring that the leather tails are tucked neatly away, avoiding any loose ends that might flap in the wind or snag on a thorn bush, your fingers moving with a mechanical, unhurried precision. The stable is now filled with the creak snap of a dozen saddles being finalized, a symphony of leather and wood that marks the transition from the stillness of the warehouse to the kinetic reality of the journey. You run your hand over the tightened hide one last time, feeling the incredible potential energy stored within the tension, a solid and unyielding bond between the merchant's craft and the beast's endurance. The heavy timber gates of the caravanserai swing wide with a resonant, hollow groan, revealing the infinite expanse of the desert floor, bathed in the thin, pale silver of the early morning. You lead the first camel by its braided jute halter, your tactile anchor being the rough, dry texture of the rope against your palm, and the slight, rhythmic tug of the animal's massive head as it adjusts to the change in light. The transition from the cool, echoing stone of the interior to the open air is marked by a sudden, sharp clarity in the scent of the world. The heavy, trapped perfumes of cinnamon and cedar are swept away by a cold, scouring wind that smells of salt, quartz, and the vast, empty spaces between the mountain peaks. You watch the lead camel's front hoof, a wide and leathery pad of incredible density, as it hovers for a fraction of a second above the threshold where the paving stones meet the raw earth. The first step is a singular, profound event. As the hoof strikes the fine, wind-rippled sand, the sound is a soft, muffled thud crunch, a low-frequency displacement of 1,000 years of silt. You feel the vibration of this contact travel through the ground and up into the soles of your feet, a grounding pulse that signals the official commencement of the 1,000-mile trek. The desert floor yields beneath the weight of the spice-laden beast, creating a deep, crescent-shaped impression in the golden dust that is immediately visited by the swirling morning drafts. Every subsequent step follows a rhythmic, hypnotic cadence, the SHHH thump of the padded feet creating a metronome for the journey that will last for months. You observe the way the sunlight, still low on the horizon, catches the fine coat of dust on the camel's shaggy flanks, turning the animal into a glowing, amber-colored ghost against the blue-gray shadows of the dunes. The silence of the desert is absolute, yet it is filled with the tiny, mechanical sounds of the caravan in motion. The rhythmic creak-creak of the leather cinches, the faint clink of a brass harness ring, and the dry, papery rustle of the burlap bales as they sway in perfect synchronization with the camel's gait. The air is so still that you can hear the microscopic tink of individual sand grains hitting the wooden crates, a constant, dry rain that will eventually polish the cedar to a silver sheen. You feel the weight of the road ahead, not as a burden, but as a vast, unfolding reality that requires only the steady, repetitive application of the next step. As the gates recede behind you, the caravanserai becomes a small, square island in a sea of shifting gold, and your world narrows to the path directly before you, the rhythm of the rope in your hand, and the steady, unyielding breath of the beast at your shoulder. The first mile is a series of these small, sensory-rich moments, a slow immersion into the silence of the high plains, where time is measured only by the movement of shadows and the cooling of the sand. You are no longer a man in a warehouse. You are a part of the wind and the dust, a single pulse in the long, slow heartbeat of the Silk Road.